The dust kicked up around the wagon wheels as Elena McKenna pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Arizona territory stretched out before her like a sea of red earth and endless sky. The year was 1882, and she was running from everything she'd ever known back in Boston. At 26, Elena carried herself like a woman who'd learned to expect disappointment. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her green eyes held shadows that spoke of heartbreak. The other passengers on the stagecoach whispered about her sometimes, wondering what could drive a proper Eastern lady to this wild frontier. Elena knew what they were thinking. She was too old to be unmarried, too quiet to be friendly, and too broken to start over. But here she was anyway, clutching a letter that promised her work as a schoolteacher in a small settlement called Cedar Ridge. The trading post appeared on the horizon just as the sun began to set. It wasn't much to look at, a collection of wooden buildings that looked like they might blow away in the next strong wind. But it was far enough from Boston that nobody would know her story. Nobody would whisper about how Thomas Whitmore had left her standing at the altar when he found out about Margaret Ashford's inheritance. Elena stepped down from the wagon, her legs shaky after 3 days of travel. The settlement was smaller than she'd imagined. There was the trading post, a saloon, a small church, and maybe 20 houses scattered around like someone had dropped them from the sky. "You must be the new schoolteacher," said a voice behind her. Elena turned to see a woman about her own age with kind eyes and work-worn hands. She wore a simple blue dress and a warm smile. "I'm Helen Martinez. My husband runs the trading post. We've been expecting you." "Elena McKenna," she replied, trying to match the woman's friendly tone. "Thank you for having me." Helen helped Elena gather her bags. "Don't mind the looks," she said quietly. "Folks here aren't used to newcomers, especially educated ladies from back east. But they'll warm up to you once they see how good you are with their children." Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed it. In Boston, she'd been the woman who couldn't keep a man. Here, she'd probably be the strange outsider who didn't belong. The boarding house was clean but simple. Elena's room had a narrow bed, a washstand, and one small window that looked out over the desert. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the photograph she'd kept hidden in her traveling bag. It showed her and Thomas on their engagement day. She looked so happy, so sure that love would be enough. Thomas stood beside her with his arm around her waist, already looking like he was somewhere else. "You were never really mine, were you?" she whispered to the photograph. 3 months later, Elena had settled into her routine at the one-room schoolhouse. She taught 15 children of various ages, from little Mary Santos, who was just learning her letters, to Big Jim Crawford, who was nearly as tall as Elena herself. The work kept her busy during the day, but the evenings were the hardest. That's when the loneliness crept in like a cold wind. Elena would sit by her window and watch the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple, wondering if this empty feeling would ever go away. The children liked her well enough. She was patient and kind, and she had a way of making even the difficult lessons seem interesting. But Elena kept her distance from the other adults in town. She was polite but never warm, helpful but never personal. "She's got walls around her heart higher than the mountains," she heard Helen Martinez tell another woman one day. Elena pretended not to hear, but the words stung because they were true. One Saturday morning in late October, Elena decided to walk to the trading post for supplies. The air was crisp and clean, nothing like the smoky atmosphere of Boston. Despite everything, she was starting to appreciate the raw beauty of this place. The trading post was busy with the usual Saturday crowd. Ranchers buying supplies, women picking up fabric and thread, men discussing the weather and cattle prices. Elena moved quietly through the store, gathering the things she needed. That's when she heard the shouting outside. "Get out of here, you savage," someone yelled. Elena looked through the window and saw a group of 5 men surrounding someone near the water trough. She couldn't see who they were bothering, but their voices were ugly with hatred. "We don't want your kind around here," another man spat. Elena set down her basket and walked outside, her heart beating fast. She'd never been one to look for trouble. But something about the cruel tone of the men's voices made her angry. The crowd parted slightly, and Elena saw who they were harassing. A tall man with long black hair and bronze skin stood perfectly, still near the water trough. He was dressed in a mix of traditional Apache clothing and white man's clothes, deerskin pants and a cotton shirt. Despite being outnumbered, he showed no fear. His name, Elena would later learn, was Kestrel, though the Apache called him by a name that meant one who soars above the storm. "You hear us talking to you?" The largest of the men, a rancher named Bull Thompson, stepped closer. "We said get moving." Kestrel's dark eyes remained calm, but Elena could see the tension in his shoulders. His hand stayed at his sides, but she noticed how he positioned himself to move quickly if needed. "This is a public place," Kestrel said quietly. His English was perfect with only a slight accent. "I have as much right to water my horse as anyone." "Like hell you do," Bull snarled, and his hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Elena didn't stop to think. She stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. "Excuse me," she said, walking right into the middle of the group. "Is there a problem?" "Here?" The men turned to stare at her, surprised by the interruption. Bull Thompson frowned, clearly annoyed. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am. Just go on about your business." "Actually," Elena said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I think it does concern me. This man appears to be trying to water his horse, which seems perfectly reasonable." She looked directly at Kestrel for the first time. His eyes were the darkest brown she'd ever seen, and they held a mixture of surprise and gratitude. There was something else there too, a kind of strength that reminded her of the desert itself, quiet but unbreakable. "Ma'am, you don't understand," another man said. "These Apache been causing trouble for months, stealing cattle, scaring folks." "Have you seen this particular man stealing cattle?" Elena asked. The men looked at each other uncomfortably. "Well, oh, but then I suggest we all go about our business and let him go about his," Elena said firmly. She turned to Kestrel and nodded toward the trading post. "I was just about to get some coffee. Would you care to join me?" Kestrel studied her face for a long moment. Elena had the strange feeling that he was seeing right through to her soul. Finally he nodded. "I would be honored," he said quietly. Elena walked beside him toward the trading post, very aware of the angry muttering behind them. Her hands were shaking, but she kept her chin up. She'd done the right thing, even if it made her enemies in town. "Thank you," Kestrel said as they reached the steps of the trading post. "That was brave." Elena looked up at him, surprised by how tall he was. She barely came to his shoulder. It was the decent thing to do. Those men had no right to treat you that way. Not everyone in your town would agree with that. "Then not everyone in my town is worth worrying about," Elena replied. Something flickered in Kestrel's eyes. "Was it amusement?" "You are not what I expected to find in this place." "What did you expect? Someone more afraid?" Elena almost laughed. "Oh, I'm afraid of plenty of things, but bullies aren't one of them." They stood there for a moment, two strangers who had somehow found themselves on the same side of an ugly situation. Elena was very aware of the curious stares from inside the trading post, but for once she didn't care what people thought. "I should go," Kestrel said finally. "I've caused you enough trouble for one day." "You didn't cause any trouble. Those men did." Kestrel smiled then, and Elena felt something flutter in her chest. It was the first time in months that she'd felt anything besides sadness or loneliness. "What's your name?" he asked. "Elena McKenna. I'm the school teacher. I am called Kestrel. Thank you again, Elena McKenna." He said her name like it was something precious, each syllable carefully pronounced. Elena watched as he untied his horse and swung up into the saddle with easy grace. "Will I see you again?" The words slipped out before Elena could stop them. Kestrel looked down at her from horseback, his dark eyes serious. "Do you want to?" Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory, not just because he was Apache and she was white, but because something about this man made her feel things she'd thought were dead inside her. Yes," she said honestly. Then you will. Kestrel rode away, leaving Elena standing on the steps of the trading post with her heart beating like a wild thing in her chest. She'd come to Arizona territory to hide from love, to nurse her broken heart in solitude. But as she watched Kestrel disappear into the desert, Elena realized that some things couldn't be hidden from. Some things found you whether you were ready or not. Inside the trading post, she could hear the whispers starting. The proper Eastern school teacher talking to an Apache like he was her equal, defending him in front of white men. It would be all over town by sunset. Elena straightened her shoulders and walked inside to finish her shopping. Let them whisper. She'd been whispered about before, but as she gay. 3 weeks passed without any sign of Kestrel. Elena found herself looking toward the desert more often than she cared to admit, hoping to see a familiar figure on horseback. But the horizon remained empty, and she began to wonder if their meeting had meant as little to him as it seemed to mean much to her. The townspeople had not forgotten the incident at the trading post. Elena noticed the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room, the way some mothers pulled their children a little closer when she passed. She'd become the woman who defended an Apache, which was almost as bad as being the woman who couldn't keep a man. "Don't mind them," Helen Martinez said one afternoon as they worked together in the trading post. "People here got long memories for the wrong things and short memories for the right ones." Elena appreciated Helen's kindness, but it didn't ease the growing loneliness in her chest. She'd thought Boston was isolating, but at least there she'd understood the rules. Here she felt like a stranger in a strange land, trying to figure out how to belong. The children in her classroom were her only real joy. Little Mary Santos had learned to read simple words, and Jim Crawford was showing real promise with his arithmetic. Teaching gave Elena a sense of purpose, a reason to get up each morning and face another day. But the evenings were still the hardest. That's when the silence pressed in around her like a weight, when she remembered Thomas's face as he told her he couldn't marry someone with her reputation, the reputation she'd earned by trusting the wrong man with her heart. "You're damaged goods now, Elena," her mother had said with characteristic bluntness. "No decent man will want you after this scandal." Those words echoed in Elena's mind every night as she sat by her window, watching the stars appear in the desert sky. Sometimes she wondered if her mother had been right. Maybe some people were just meant to be alone. It was a Tuesday morning when Elena decided to walk out to the small canyon where she'd been told medicinal plants grew wild. The school's medicine box was nearly empty, and several children had been fighting coughs. She'd heard that willow bark and wild sage could help, though she'd never gathered plants herself. The canyon was about 2 miles from town, hidden behind a ridge of red rocks that reminded Elena of a sleeping giant. She packed a small basket, and a canteen of water told Helen where she was going, and set out just after dawn. The walk was longer than Elena had expected. The desert that looked flat from town was actually full of small hills and hidden valleys. The sun climbed higher as she walked, and Elena began to feel the heat through her long sleeves and heavy skirt. When she finally reached the canyon, Elena was amazed by what she found. It was like stepping into a secret garden. A small stream ran through the bottom, creating a ribbon of green in the red landscape. Cottonwood trees provided shade, and wildflowers bloomed in bright patches of yellow and purple. Elena spent the morning gathering plants, using a small book she'd borrowed from Helen to identify what she needed. The work was peaceful, and for the first time in weeks she felt her spirits lift. There was something healing about being alone in this beautiful place, something that reminded her that the world was bigger than her problems. She was kneeling by the stream, washing the dirt from some willow bark when she heard the first rumble of thunder. Elena looked up in surprise. The morning had been clear and bright, but now dark clouds were gathering on the horizon with startling speed. The desert sky, she was learning, could change as quickly as a person's fortune. The first drops of rain began to fall as Elena packed her basket. By the time she started back toward town, the drops had become a steady sprinkle. Within minutes, the sprinkle became a downpour. Elena had never experienced a desert storm. The rain fell in sheets so thick she could barely see 10 feet ahead. The sandy ground that had been so solid under her feet turned into slick mud. Lightning split the sky with brilliant white cracks, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the earth. Elena tried to keep walking, but she was quickly soaked through. Her heavy skirt dragged in the mud, and her boots slipped with every step. Worse, she realized she was no longer sure which direction led back to town. Everything looked different in the storm. Panic began to rise in Elena's chest. She'd heard stories about people getting lost in the desert, about flash floods that could sweep away anything in their path. The small washes she'd crossed easily on her way out were now running with muddy water. Elena looked around desperately for shelter. Through the rain, she spotted a dark opening in the rocks, a cave or overhang that might provide protection. She stumbled toward it, her heart pounding with fear and exhaustion. The cave was deeper than it looked from outside, stretching back into the rock face like a small room. Elena collapsed just inside the entrance, gasping for breath. Her clothes were soaked, her hair hanging in wet strings around her face. She was safe from the storm, but she was also completely lost and alone. That's when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Elena pressed herself against the cave wall, suddenly afraid. Who would be riding in weather like this? Her heart hammered as the hoofbeats came closer, then stopped just outside the cave. "Hello?" a familiar voice called. "Is someone in there?" Elena's breath caught in her throat. "Kestrel?" A moment later, he appeared in the cave entrance, leading his horse. He was as wet as Elena, his long hair plastered to his head, his cotton shirt clinging to his broad shoulders, but his dark eyes held the same calm strength she remembered. "Elena." He said her name like a prayer of thanksgiving. "I saw you from the ridge. Are you hurt?" "No," Elena managed, though her voice was shaking. "Just scared. I got lost in the storm." Kestrel secured his horse at the back of the cave, then came to kneel beside Elena. His presence filled the small space, making her very aware of how alone they were. "This storm will pass," he said gently, "but we'll need to wait it out. The washes will be running too high to cross safely." Elena nodded, trying to ignore how her heart sped up when Kestrel was near. She watched as he gathered some dry wood from the back of the cave and built a small fire with practiced ease. Soon, warm light flickered on the cave walls, and Elena felt some of her fear fade away. "How did you find me?" she asked. "I was hunting when I saw the storm coming. I knew the canyon would be dangerous for anyone caught out here." Kestrel sat across from her, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I hoped it wasn't you, but I had to look." "You came looking for me specifically?" "I've been watching over you," Kestrel said simply, "from a distance, making sure you were safe." Elena stared at him in surprise. "Why?" Kestrel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the firelight. "Because you showed me kindness when you didn't have to. Because you stood up for what was right even when it cost you. Because..." He paused, then continued more softly. "Because I see pain in your eyes that matches my own." Elena felt tears prick her eyes at his words. She'd worked so hard to hide her hurt, to present a calm face to the world. But somehow this man saw right through her defenses. "I'm not worth watching over," she said quietly. "Why do you say that?" The question hung in the air between them. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the cave, there was only the crackle of the fire and the sound of Elena's rapid breathing. Maybe it was the storm or the isolation, or the way Kestrel looked at her like she mattered. Whatever the reason, Elena felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. "Because it's true," she whispered. "I'm nothing but damaged goods, a woman no man could want." Kestrel leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Who told you that?" "Everyone." The word came out like a sob. "My fiancé, when he left me for someone with more money. My mother, when she said no decent man would have me now. The people in town who whisper about the spinster school teacher who's too old and too strange to find a husband." Elena couldn't stop the words now. They poured out of her like water from a broken dam. All the hurt and shame and loneliness she'd been carrying for so long. "Thomas said I wasn't enough for him. He said Margaret Ashford could give him the life he deserved, and I was just a mistake he'd almost made. He made me feel like I was worthless, like love was something I didn't deserve. Tears were streaming down Elena's face now, and she didn't try to stop them. "No man has ever claimed me," she cried. "Not really. Thomas wanted me when it was convenient. But when it mattered, he chose someone else. I'm 26 years old, and I've never been anyone's first choice. I never will be." Kestrel moved closer, close enough that Elena could feel the warmth radiating from his body. His hand reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he gently touched her face, his thumb brushing away her tears. "Elena," he said, and his voice was soft as velvet, strong as steel. "Look at me." She raised her eyes to meet his, seeing her own pain reflected there, but also something else, something that looked like fierce protection and tender understanding. Thomas was a fool," Kestrel said, his words carrying absolute conviction. "Any man who would choose money over a woman like you doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as you." "You don't understand," Elena whispered. "You don't know what I've done, the scandal I caused. My reputation—" "Your reputation," Kestrel interrupted, "is that of a woman brave enough to stand up to 5 armed men to protect a stranger. A woman kind enough." The morning after the storm dawned clear and bright, as if the desert itself had been washed clean. Elena woke in her small room at the boarding house with a feeling she barely recognized. Hope. Kestrel had escorted her safely back to town, the evening before, both of them quiet as they rode his horse through the still dripping landscape. But when he helped her down at the edge of town, his hands had lingered on her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "I meant what I said," he had whispered, so quietly that only she could hear. Elena had nodded, her heart too full for words. She meant what she'd said too. Now as she dressed for another day of teaching, Elena caught herself humming. When was the last time she'd hummed? She couldn't remember. At the schoolhouse, the children seemed to sense her lighter mood. Little Mary Santos brought her a handful of wildflowers she'd picked on the way to school, and even sullen Jim Crawford cracked a smile when Elena praised his penmanship. But it was during the lunch break, when the children were playing outside, that Elena noticed the first gift. A small carved wooden bird sat on her desk, perfectly crafted from what looked like juniper wood. The bird was in flight, its wings spread wide, its tiny head turned toward the sky. Elena picked it up with trembling fingers, marveling at the detail. Whoever had carved this was incredibly skilled. She knew somehow that it was from Kestrel. Elena looked around the empty classroom, then walked to the window that faced the desert. In the distance, barely visible against the red rocks, she could see a figure on horseback. Even from this far away, she knew it was him. She held up the wooden bird so he could see it, then pressed it to her heart. The distant figure raised his hand in acknowledgement, then disappeared behind the rocks. Elena smiled, tucking the bird carefully into her desk drawer. The Apache way of courting, it seemed, was beautifully subtle. The gifts continued over the following days. A bundle of sweet-smelling herbs tied with grass rope appeared on her doorstep. A smooth river stone painted with intricate symbols was left on her windowsill. A necklace of small turquoise beads was draped over the handle of the schoolhouse door. Each gift was left in secret, but Elena began to understand their meaning. The herbs were for protection and healing. The painted stone told a story in Apache symbols, something about 2 paths becoming one. The turquoise necklace was the color of the desert sky, the color of infinite possibility. "Someone's got an admirer," Helen Martinez said one morning as she noticed the necklace Elena was wearing. Elena blushed, her fingers going automatically to the smooth turquoise beads. "It's nothing serious." "Honey, a man doesn't give a woman turquoise unless it's plenty serious. My grandmother was half Apache, and she taught me a few things about their ways. That necklace says you're being courted proper." Elena felt her heart skip. Courted? Oh yes. And whoever's doing the courting has good taste. That's real turquoise, not the cheap stuff. Probably took him days to find stones that perfect. Elena thought about this as she walked home from school that afternoon. Courted. The word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. Thomas had never really courted her. Their relationship had been more of a convenient arrangement between families. But this felt different. This felt like she was being treasured. It was 3 days later when Kestrel finally appeared in person. Elena was grading papers by lamplight when she heard a soft tap on her window. Her heart immediately began to race. She set down her pen and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain. Kestrel stood in the shadows beside the boarding house, barely visible in the darkness. He gestured toward the desert, a question in his eyes. Elena looked around her small room, at the pile of papers, waiting to be graded at the sensible life she'd built for herself. Then she looked back at Kestrel, at the promise of something extraordinary waiting just beyond her window. She grabbed her shawl and slipped out the back door. Kestrel was waiting for her behind the building, holding the reins of his horse. Into the moonlight, he looked like something from a dream, tall and strong and impossibly handsome. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly. "I wasn't sure I would either," Elena admitted. "But here I am," Kestrel smiled, and Elena felt that familiar flutter in her chest. "Would you like to see something beautiful?" Elena nodded, and Kestrel helped her up onto his horse. She sat behind him, her arms around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him against her back. It was scandalous and improper and absolutely wonderful. They rode in comfortable silence through the desert night. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light over the landscape and making everything look magical. Elena had never felt so alive, so aware of every sensation, the movement of the horse beneath her, the desert wind in her hair, the steady rhythm of Kestrel's breathing. After about 20 minutes, Kestrel guided the horse up a narrow trail that wound between tall rocks. Elena could hear the sound of water somewhere ahead. They emerged into a hidden canyon Elena had never seen before. A small waterfall tumbled down the rocks into a pool that reflected the moon like a mirror. Desert flowers bloomed along the water's edge, their scent sweet in the night air. "This is where I come to think," Kestrel said as he helped Elena down from the horse. "It's been in my family for generations. My grandmother used to bring me here when I was a boy." Elena walked to the edge of the pool, amazed by the beauty of the place. "It's like a secret garden." "I wanted to share it with you," Kestrel said, coming to stand beside her. "In Apache tradition, when a man is serious about a woman, he shows her the places that are sacred to him." Elena turned to look at him, her heart hammering. "Are you serious about me?" Kestrel reached out and took her hands in his. His palms were warm and calloused from years of hard work, but his touch was infinitely gentle. "Elena, I have thought about you every day since we met. I have watched you from afar, making sure you were safe, wondering if I had any right to hope that you might care for me too." "You do," Elena whispered. "Have that right, I mean. I do care for you." Kestrel's eyes searched her face in the moonlight. "Even though I'm Apache? Even though it will cause you trouble?" Elena thought about the whispers that would follow them, the disapproval they would face. Then she thought about how she felt when she was with him, valued, protected, alive. "I've spent my whole life trying to please other people," she said. "Trying to be the perfect daughter, the perfect fiancée, the perfect teacher. And where did it get me? Alone and heartbroken, convinced I wasn't worth loving." She stepped closer to Kestrel, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "You see something in me that no one else has ever seen. You make me feel like I matter. So no, I don't care that you're Apache. I only care that you're you." Kestrel smiled, and Elena felt her world shift on its axis. "In that case," he said, "let me tell you about the Apache way of claiming someone you love." They sat beside the moonlit pool, and Kestrel began to share his culture with Elena. He told her about the Apache belief that love was not just an emotion, but a sacred responsibility. When you claimed someone, you became responsible for their happiness, their safety, their spiritual well-being. "It's not about ownership," he explained. It's about choosing to be the guardian of another person's heart. Elena listened, fascinated. This was so different from the romantic notions she'd grown up with, where love was portrayed as a kind of pleasant madness, all passion and little substance. "What about the woman?" she asked. "Does she claim the man too?" Kestrel's smile widened. "Of course, the claiming goes both ways. When two people choose each other, they become responsible for protecting what they've found together." "And what have we found?" Elena asked, though she thought she already knew. "Something worth fighting for," Kestrel said simply. They talked until the moon set, sharing stories of their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Elena learned that Kestrel's Apache name meant one who soars above the storm, given to him because of his ability to stay calm in any crisis. He learned that Elena had always wanted to write stories but had been told it wasn't practical for a woman. "Write them anyway," Kestrel said. "Write about the desert, about the people you meet here. Write about finding love where you least expected it." Elena laughed softly. "Who would want to read love stories written by an old maid school teacher?" "I would," Kestrel said seriously. "And I think you'd be surprised how many others would too." As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Kestrel rode Elena back to town. But instead of leaving her at the boarding house, he stopped at the schoolhouse. "Meet me here after school today?" he asked. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. Everything was moving so fast, but for once in her life, she didn't want to slow down. The next few weeks fell into a pattern that filled Elena with a happiness she'd never known existed. During the day, she taught her students with renewed energy and enthusiasm. After school, she would meet Kestrel, and he would show her more of his world. He taught her to identify the plants that could heal and the ones that could harm. He showed her how to read the signs that predicted weather changes, how to find water in the desert, how to move quietly enough to observe wild animals without disturbing them. But more than survival skills, Kestrel was teaching Elena how to see herself through his eyes. When she worried about her age, he told her The trouble began on a Tuesday morning in late November, when Elena was teaching her students about arithmetic and little Mary Santos came running into the schoolhouse with wide, frightened eyes. "Miss Elena," Mary gasped, "there's soldiers coming. Lots of them, with blue uniforms and big horses." Elena's heart dropped to her stomach. She walked to the window and saw them, a full cavalry unit riding into Cedar Ridge with dust clouds billowing behind them. At the head of the column rode an officer with golden hair and a familiar proud way of holding his shoulders. Thomas Whitmore. Her former fiancé had found her. Elena's hands shook as she tried to continue the lesson, but her mind was racing. Why was Thomas here? What did he want after all this time? She got her answer an hour later when Helen Martinez burst into the schoolhouse, her face flushed with worry. "Elena, there's a cavalry captain asking for you at the trading post. Says he's your fiancé and he's here to take you home to safety." Elena closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "He's not my fiancé anymore, Helen. That ended months ago." "Well, he's telling everyone in town that you've been confused by desert madness and Indian influence. Says he's here to rescue you from whatever hold they have on you." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November wind. Thomas had always been good at making his version of events sound reasonable, especially to people who wanted to believe him. "I need to see him," Elena said, though the last thing she wanted was to face Thomas again. "Elena, honey," Helen said gently, "there's something else. He's been asking questions about you. About who you spend time with, where you go after school. Bull Thompson and his friends have been talking." Elena's blood ran cold. If Thomas knew about Kestrel, if he was here in some official capacity. She dismissed her students early and walked to the trading post with Helen, her mind churning with worry and anger. How dare Thomas show up here and disrupt the life she'd built? How dare he claim to be rescuing her from anything? The trading post was crowded with curious townspeople and blue-uniformed soldiers. Thomas stood in the center of it all, looking exactly as Elena remembered, handsome in a cold, aristocratic way, with pale blue eyes that never seemed to see past the surface of anything. He spotted Elena the moment she walked in, and his face lit up with what looked like genuine relief. "Elena, my darling, thank God I found you." He crossed the room in quick strides and tried to take her hands, but Elena stepped back. "Thomas, this is unexpected." "Unexpected?" Thomas laughed, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Darling, when I heard you'd disappeared into Apache territory, I couldn't rest until I knew you were safe. I've been searching for you for months." Elena was very aware of all the people listening to their conversation. Thomas was performing for an audience just as he always had. "As you can see, I'm perfectly safe," Elena said coolly. "And I hardly disappeared. I took a teaching position, which is hardly unusual for an unmarried woman." Thomas's smile faltered, slightly at the word unmarried, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, darling. But this wilderness is no place for a refined lady like yourself. I've come to take you home where you belong." "This is my home now," Elena said firmly. Thomas's eyes hardened, and Elena caught a glimpse of the controlling man she'd been lucky to escape. "Elena, you're clearly not thinking clearly. The desert sun, the isolation, it's affected your judgment, but don't worry, I'm here now. We'll have you back to civilization in no time." "Captain Whitmore," Elena said, deliberately using his title. To put distance between them, "I appreciate your concern, but it's misplaced. I'm exactly where I want to be." Thomas studied her face, and Elena could see him calculating his next move. He'd always been strategic, always thinking 3 steps ahead in any situation. "Very well," he said finally. "If you won't listen to reason from me, perhaps you'll listen to reason from the territorial government. I'm here on official business, Elena. There have been reports of Apache raids in this area, and all civilians are being advised to relocate to safer territories." Elena felt the room go quiet around her. This was worse than she'd thought. "What kind of reports?" she asked. "Cattle theft, harassment of settlers, threats against white women?" Thomas's eyes never left her face. "I've been told there's even been contact between Apache warriors and local residents. Very dangerous contact." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Someone had told Thomas about her and Kestrel. "But who?" "I wouldn't know anything about that," Elena said carefully. "Wouldn't you?" Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "Because I have witnesses who say otherwise, Elena. Witnesses who've seen you consorting with savages, putting yourself and this entire community at risk." Elena felt trapped, cornered like a wild animal. Around them, the townspeople were murmuring, with excitement and fear. The word Apache always had that effect on frontier settlements. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh, I understand perfectly." Thomas's smile was cold as winter. "You've been seduced by some romantic notion about noble savages and forbidden love. But I'm here to remind you who you really are, Elena. You're a civilized woman from a good family, and you don't belong with animals." The word animals hit Elena like a physical blow. The casual cruelty of it, the way Thomas dismissed an entire people as less than human, made her see red. "Get out," she said quietly. "I beg your pardon?" "I said, get out." Elena's voice was stronger, now carrying clearly through the quiet trading post. "You have no authority over me, Thomas. You gave up that right when you left me for Margaret Ashford's money." Thomas's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. He'd clearly expected Elena to be grateful for his rescue, to fall back into the role of dependent woman who needed his protection. "Elena, you're making a scene." "Good. Maybe it's time someone made a scene." Elena stepped closer to Thomas, her green eyes blazing. "You want to talk about who I really am? I'm a woman who's finally learned her own worth. I'm a woman who's found love with someone who sees me as an equal, not a possession." The crowd gasped at her words, but Elena didn't care. She was done hiding, done being ashamed of the best thing that had ever happened to her. "And if you think you can come here with your soldiers and your threats and tear down what I've built, you're wrong. Dead wrong." Thomas's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the petty, vindictive man underneath. "You stupid girl," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Consorting with Apache raiders? You've committed treason against your own race." The only treason here, Elena shot back, is your betrayal of common decency. That's enough. A new voice cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone turned to see a tall Apache warrior standing. In the doorway of the trading post, Kestrel had come. He stood perfectly still, taking in the scene with calm, dark eyes. He wore traditional Apache clothing today: buckskin pants and shirt, a red headband, moccasins that had carried him silently to the door. In his hand was a rifle held casually but ready. The silence stretched like a taut wire. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the fear radiating from the crowd around her. Thomas's hand went automatically to his sidearm, but he didn't draw. Even he wasn't foolish enough to start a gunfight in a room full of civilians. "So," Thomas said, his voice dripping with contempt, "this is your noble savage, Elena. I have to say you've certainly lowered your standards." Kestrel's eyes never left Thomas's face, but Elena saw a muscle twitch in his jaw. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly controlled. "Elena," he said quietly, "are you in danger?" The simple question, spoken with such calm certainty, made Elena's heart swell with love. Here was a man who would face down an entire cavalry unit to protect her, who had put himself at terrible risk just by walking into this room. "No," Elena said, moving to stand beside Kestrel. "I'm not in danger from anyone in this room." She took Kestrel's free hand in hers, feeling his fingers close around hers with gentle strength. The gesture was deliberate, unmistakable. She was choosing her side. Thomas laughed bitterly. "Elena, you can't be serious. This savage has obviously filled your head with lies, made you think you care for him. But it's not real, darling. It's just loneliness and confusion." "Don't," Kestrel said quietly. "Call her darling. She is not yours." "And she's yours?" Thomas's voice was full of mockery. "A white woman and an Apache warrior? Do you know what your own people think of that union? Do you know what mine will do to you when they find out?" Elena felt Kestrel's hand tighten on hers, but his voice remained steady. "I know what love is," Kestrel said simply. "And I know what Elena is worth. That seems to be more than you ever learned." Thomas's face went red with rage. "You arrogant, Captain." One of Thomas's soldiers stepped forward, his expression nervous. "Sir, perhaps we should return to camp. Plan our next move." Thomas looked around the room, taking in the faces of the townspeople. Some looked frightened, others curious, but none looked supportive of his cause. Elena realized that Thomas's heavy-handed approach had backfired. Instead of looking like a rescuer, he looked like a bully. "This isn't over, Elena," Thomas said, coldly. "I came here to save you from your own foolishness, but I can see you're determined to destroy yourself. Fine. But when your Apache friends start raiding this settlement, when..." The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn. Elena woke to the sound of gunfire and shouting. She threw on her clothes and ran outside to find Cedar Ridge in chaos. Buildings were burning, people were screaming, and through the smoke she could see Apache warriors on horseback racing between the houses, but something was wrong with the scene. Elena had spent months learning about Apache ways from Kestrel, and this attack felt different. Too wild, too destructive. The Apache she knew were strategic fighters, not random raiders. "Elena!" Helen Martinez grabbed her arm, her face streaked with soot and tears. "Thank God you're safe. We need to get to the church. It's the strongest building." Elena let herself be pulled along with the crowd of frightened townspeople, but her mind was racing. Where was Kestrel? Was he safe? Was he somewhere in the desert, unaware that his people were attacking the town? Or worse, was he part of this attack? The thought made Elena sick to her stomach, but she couldn't shake it completely. She'd been so sure of Kestrel's feelings for her, but what if Thomas had been right? What if she'd been naive about the dangers of loving across enemy lines? The townspeople huddled in the church as the sounds of battle continued outside. Elena found herself pressed against a wall next to Mrs. Patterson, who kept shooting her accusing looks. "This is your fault," Mrs. Patterson finally hissed. "You've been meeting with them, giving them information about our defenses. You've betrayed us all." "That's not true," Elena said firmly, though doubt gnawed at her heart. Isn't it? Funny how they knew exactly where to hit us, exactly when we'd be most vulnerable. Before Elena could respond, the church doors burst open. Thomas Whitmore strode in, his cavalry uniform torn and bloody, his face grim with purpose. "Is everyone here accounted for?" he demanded. The people called out names, checking on neighbors and family members. Miraculously, it seemed that while there was property damage, no one had been seriously hurt. "Good," Thomas said. "My men have driven off the raiders, but they'll be back. We need to evacuate immediately." "Evacuate?" Elena stood up, her heart pounding. "This is our home." "Your home is a target now," Thomas replied coldly. "Thanks to your collaboration with the enemy." Elena felt the eyes of the entire town turn toward her. In the flickering candlelight of the church, their faces looked suspicious and afraid. "I didn't collaborate with anyone," Elena said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent church. "No? Then explain how Apache raiders knew exactly where to find our grain stores, our ammunition, our horses." Thomas stepped closer, his pale eyes boring into hers. "Explain how they knew which buildings were empty, which families were away visiting relatives." Elena's mouth went dry. She didn't know how to explain those things because she didn't understand them herself. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that Kestrel wasn't involved. "I don't know how they knew those things," Elena said. "But no, it wasn't because of me." "Convenient," Thomas sneered. "Your Apache lover disappeared right before the attack, and now you claim innocence. He's not—" Elena started, then stopped. There was no point in denying her relationship with Kestrel now. Everyone knew. "He's not what, Elena? Not Apache? Not a warrior? Not someone who would choose his people over a white woman when it came down to it?" Each word hit Elena like a physical blow because they echoed her own deepest fears. She loved Kestrel, trusted him. But did she really know what he would do when forced to choose between her and his people? "I won't leave," Elena said quietly. "You don't have a choice." Thomas gestured to two of his soldiers. "Escort Miss McKenna to the wagon. She's clearly not capable of making rational decisions." "No." Elena stepped back, her hands raised. "I said I won't leave." "Elena," Helen Martinez said gently, "maybe it would be safer." "I won't abandon everything I've built here based on accusations and fear," Elena interrupted. "If people want to leave, that's their choice. But I'm staying." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "You're under military protection now, Elena. That means you follow military orders." "I'm a civilian in a territory that isn't even a state yet," Elena shot back. "You have no authority over me. I have the authority to protect American citizens from hostile forces, even when those citizens are too foolish to protect themselves." Elena looked around the church, seeing her neighbors and friends watching this confrontation with fear and uncertainty. She realized that Thomas was counting on their fear to isolate her, to make her seem like the enemy. But Elena had learned something about herself over the past months. She'd learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, braver than she'd ever dared to hope, and she wasn't going to let fear, Thomas's or anyone else's, destroy what she'd found. "You want to know the truth about the Apache?" Elena said, her voice carrying to every corner of the church. "The truth is that they're not monsters. They're people trying to protect their land, their families, their way of life. Just like we are." The crowd murmured uneasily, but Elena continued. "Yes, I've been meeting with an Apache warrior. His name is Kestrel, and he's shown me nothing but kindness and respect. He's taught me about healing plants, about reading the weather, about seeing the beauty in this desert we all share." "Elena, stop," Thomas warned. But she ignored him. "And yes, I love him. I love him because he sees the best in me, because he makes me feel worthy of love, because he's shown me what it means to be valued for who I really am." Elena looked directly at Thomas as she spoke the next words. "He's shown me what real love looks like, and it's nothing like what I thought I had before." Thomas's face went white with rage and humiliation. In front of all these people, Elena was choosing an Apache warrior over him. It was the ultimate insult to his pride and his prejudices. "You foolish girl," he snarled. "Do you think your savage lover will protect you when his people come back to finish what they started? Do you think he'll choose you over his own kind? I think," Elena said quietly, "that love doesn't work the way you think it does. It's not about choosing sides, it's about choosing to see the humanity in everyone." Before Thomas could respond, the church doors opened again. But this time, it wasn't soldiers who entered. It was Kestrel, followed by 3 other Apache warriors. Theo, townspeople pressed back against the walls in terror, but Elena's heart leaped with relief and joy. Kestrel was alive, and he was here. Kestrel's dark eyes found Elena immediately, scanning her face for signs of harm. When he saw that she was uninjured, some of the tension left his shoulders. "I came as soon as I heard about the attack," he said, his voice calm despite the rifles now pointed at him. "Elena, are you hurt?" "No," Elena said, stepping forward despite the gasps from the crowd. "But I was worried about you." "Don't move," Thomas barked, his hand on his gun. "You're all under arrest for raiding American settlements." One of the Apache warriors with Kestrel stepped forward. He was older, with gray streaks in his long hair, and the bearing of a leader. "We did not attack this place," he said, in accented but clear English. "These raiders were not from our band." "All Apache look the same to me," Thomas replied with casual cruelty. Elena felt sick at Thomas's words, but Kestrel remained calm. "The men who attacked your town were outcasts," Kestrel explained. "Warriors who were banished from our tribe for breaking our laws. They have been raiding on both sides, attacking Apache camps as well as white settlements." "Convenient story," Thomas sneered. "It is the truth," the older warrior said with dignity. "I am Chief Running Bear. These outcasts have been stealing from my people and using our name to cover their crimes. We have been tracking them for weeks." Elena felt a flicker of hope. If what they were saying was true, then Kestrel hadn't betrayed her after all. "Can you prove this?" she asked. Kestrel nodded and gestured to one of his companions, who stepped forward carrying a canvas bag. The warrior opened the bag and poured its contents onto the church floor. Elena gasped. It was jewelry, coins, personal items, things that had obviously been stolen from various places. Some of the townspeople recognized their own possessions among the scattered items. "We found their camp this morning," Kestrel explained. "These are things they stole from many places. Apache camps, Mexican settlements, white towns. They have been using the fear between our peoples to cover their own greed." Chief Running Bear stepped forward, his weathered face grave. "My son tells me that one of your women has shown kindness to our people," he said, looking directly at Elena. "He tells me that she sees past the hatred to the person beneath. This is rare wisdom." Elena felt every eye in the church focused on her. This was the moment when everything would be decided, not just her future with Kestrel, but the future of peace between their two peoples. "Chief Running Bear," Elena said, stepping forward with as much dignity as she could muster. "Your son has shown me the same kindness. He's taught me that love is stronger than fear, that understanding is more powerful than hatred." She turned to face the townspeople, these neighbors she'd grown to care about despite their recent suspicion. "We have a choice," she said simply. "We can let fear divide us, let men like Thomas convince us that anyone different from us is our enemy. Or we can choose to see the truth, that we all want the same things: safety for our families, food on our tables, the chance to live our lives in peace." "Pretty words," Thomas said bitterly. "But words won't stop the next attack."